Okay, everybody, welcome to the program. This is the Otherppl Show, a weekly podcast featuring in-depth conversations with today's leading writers. It is a books and culture show. I'm Brad Listi, and I'm in Los Angeles. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. Hope you're good out there, wherever you happen to be. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button wherever you listen, and you can follow me on Instagram and Blue Sky. I've got a great show for you today. My guest is Amber Sparks, author of a debut novel called Happy People Don't Live Here. It is available from Liveright Press. Happy People Don't Live Here is a mother-daughter story. It is a ghost story. It is a love story. There are comedic elements. It is this wonderful, hybrid work of fiction. It's doing a lot of different things, and it is a delightful combination of the quirky and the eerie. I had a great time talking with Amber, who returns to the program for a second time. She first appeared more than 13 years ago, all the way back in episode 108. And now here she is, back on the show, celebrating the publication of her debut novel. Again, it is called Happy People Don't Live Here. You will hear Amber Sparks and I in conversation in just a bit. Today's episode of The Otherppl Show is brought to you by Echo Books, publisher of A Different Kind of Tension, new and selected stories by Jonathan Lethem. A Different Kind of Tension is the official October pick of the Otherppl Book Club. It is a definitive collection from a master of the form. It fluidly moves between realism and the surreal, the absurd and the mundane. It features talking animals, couples in trouble, technologies gone haywire. You guys all know Jonathan Lethem, right? He's going to be a guest on this program in the weeks ahead, so stay tuned for that. If you would like to join my book club, the Otherppl Book Club, you can do so at otherppl.com. Get a new book delivered to your door every 30 days. I interview book club authors right here on the show. So one more time, the book is called A Different Kind of Tension, new and selected stories by Jonathan Lethem, available now from Echo. Today's episode is also brought to you by Kathleen Schmidt, PR. Listen, writing a book is hard, and launching it should not be guesswork. That's where Kathleen Schmidt comes in. She's a publicist and a strategist and the mind behind campaigns that truly make a difference. With over 30 years of experience across the publishing world in a variety of different roles, from publicity to marketing to agenting, even acquisitions, Kathleen Schmidt creates practical, data-driven plans. She will help you with things like message and positioning to make your book stand out. She does media coaching and pitching for television, print, and podcasts. She can help you with podcast tour strategy, with smart audience targeting, author platform and newsletter growth, and events and partnerships. So if you are an author and you want clarity, coverage, and sales momentum, choose Kathleen Schmidt. You can schedule a consultation by reaching out to Kathleen at kathleen@kmspr.com. Again, that's kathleen@kmspr.com. And you can visit her website at www.kmspr.com. So a quick reminder about my weekly email newsletter. You can subscribe over at bradlisti.substack.com. I would love it if you did. I will email you once a week and let you know about the latest episodes of this program. I also share a list of links to things that I have been reading and finding interesting. So if that sounds good, check it out at bradlisti.substack.com. I also want to give a quick plug to DeepDive. That is my company. DeepDive is an education platform that creates in-depth courses for curious minds. If you are a writer and you're working on a book, if you're struggling with a book, if you have long wanted to write and publish a novel, but it seems to be eluding you, you need to check out How to Write a Novel, the flagship course from DeepDive. It features more than 50 hours of never-before-heard insight, inspiration, and instruction from nearly 4 dozen of today's most celebrated contemporary authors. People like Emily St. John Mandel, Stephen Graham Jones, Melissa Broder, Steve Almond, Vivi Ganeshananthan, Kimberly King Parsons, Juliet Escoria, El Nash, Jonathan Evison, Antoine Wilson, Purichista Hakpour, Tiffany Clark Harrison. It's an all-star lineup, and it is an excellent education that it's kind of like MFA level education, but at a fraction of the price. So if the voices in your head are not working out for you, if you're struggling and you need some new perspectives, check out How to Write a Novel, the flagship course from DeepDive, over at www.deepdive.audio. There is also a new course from DeepDive called How to Write Autobiographical Fiction. It too is available. It is an intensive course, shorter form. It is taught by Hannah Pittard, the acclaimed author of several novels, most recently a work of autofiction called If You Love It, Let It Kill You. How to Write Autobiographical Fiction also features Michael Wheaton, the founder of Autofocus Books, which is an independent press specializing in autobiographical literature. So you can check all of it out over at www.deepdive.audio. All right, so my guest once again is Amber Sparks. Her debut novel is called Happy People Don't Live Here. It is available from Liveright. Amber Sparks is the author of the short story collections And I Do Not Forgive You. There's another one called The Unfinished World. Her writing has appeared in a variety of publications, including the Paris Review, Granta, and Slate, and she lives in Washington, D.C. I am very happy to welcome Amber back onto this program for the first time in about 13 years, and to help her celebrate the publication of this debut novel. So let's get to the conversation. Here I am with Amber Sparks, and her novel, one more time, is called Happy People Don't Live Here.
Yeah, I actually was an actress, not a successful one in any way. So to be clear, but I did go to school to study acting in college, and I actually wanted to direct also. That was actually really what I wanted to do primarily. But I got into acting and was acting a lot after I graduated in the Twin Cities, like Minneapolis, St. Paul, stage acting primarily. I was not ever particularly interested in screen acting, although I did do, like every actor, some, commercials for like local ski resorts and things like that. I did.
In Minnesota?
Yeah. I think the funniest thing I ever did, which stayed with me for a long time, was I was in a video that the University of Minnesota made as a cautionary tale for incoming freshmen about the dangers of alcohol. And I was actually the girl who dies of binge drinking at a party or whatever. And, the last shot, I think, is like me in the ambulance, and they've got, a blanket draped over me, and it's sad music playing. And it was so funny because I worked in retail, in addition to acting, of course, because you can't pay the bills with acting. And I'd always get people that would come in and would recognize me from this University of Minnesota video. They'd be like, "Oh man, you're the drunk chick." So it was a lasting part, apparently.
So wait, are you from Minnesota?
Yes. I'm actually, I should say I'm not like originally from there. And I'm actually from sort of all over the Midwest. I was born in Iowa, spent some childhood in Nebraska, and then I was moved to Wisconsin when I was in high school. And then I moved to Minnesota for college and was there for 10 years or something. I don't remember. But I always think of myself as Minnesotan first and foremost now, because it was just like these very formative years for me. And I love it. I love the Twin Cities.
Where in Wisconsin did you? I'm from Wisconsin. So where did you live in Wisconsin?
Madison. And my dad still lives there.
Oh, he does. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious to know your thoughts on this background as an actress, and this kind of history of performance, and how you think it might affect your performance on the page and your ability to sort of inhabit characters and voice characters. There has to be some correlation.
Oh yeah, it's everywhere in my fiction. For example, giving my characters business is always really important to me. I think a lot of times when I'm working as a writer, when I'm actually sitting down and sort of doing the business of like putting craft on the page, structuring things, moving things around, right? Like the practical work, a lot of what's in my head all the time, I'm thinking like a director. I'm thinking about where are my characters in relation to each other? Like what business do they have? What are they doing? What's their motivation? What are they doing next? So all of that stuff is almost always with me when I'm writing fiction. And in addition, I think just because for years and years I was so influenced by playwrights, and that's who I was reading primarily, that there's just a lot of that. I think that, I don't know if it comes through in the work. It sounds like maybe a little bit, but there's definitely, there's always a lot of theatricality that I'm always sort of thinking about. I think there's Christopher Durang or who else? Tony Kushner, some of these folks that I really love. I kind of feel like I'm not channeling them. That's a terribly stupid thing to say, but like I definitely feel like there is a theatricality that I'm always sort of thinking about. It's a layer in the work, but I don't think about it as like writing theatrical fiction. I think it's more like making sure that my fiction is grounded and that it feels, it has a place, it has a sense of reality to it. And actually, I think maybe that's even kind of more important than ever for me in my work, because a lot of my writing tends to be a little bit surreal. And so having that sense of grounding sort of at the bottom of it all, it's like a experimental play, right? If all your characters are just kind of floating around on stage, it's actually really bad and nobody wants to see that. But, you have to give people grounding. You have to give them a place. You have to give them motivation. You have to give them, something to do. And then it feels like you can go nuts around the edges.
Well, I was thinking that like it might give you a more finely tuned sense of your audience. Like, because when you're up on stage, you're obviously in front of people and you kind of feel how it's playing. Whereas I think sometimes writers can be so insulated from the end user, if we can use that term to describe a reader. But, like there's this physical distance and maybe this even like psychological distance. It can be easy to sort of trick yourself into believing that no one's ever going to read this thing. And that can be useful. But I also think it could be useful to have that sensitivity for the reader. Like, am I barking up the right tree?
I think that does make a lot of sense. I mean, for example, and I know a lot of writers do this, but I read everything out loud before I'm, like when I'm working on different drafts, I read everything. I always read all the drafts out loud. They have to sound good. And I'm always thinking about what, especially with the novel, because this is the first novel I've written, right? And I was thinking a lot about, okay, what would I perform in this novel? Like, what can I write that I could also perform in a reading? Because to me, I think there are just these dreadful, right? There are dreadful readings. There are good readings, and then there are just awful readings. And there's almost like no in between. And the dreadful readings are so often novelists, unfortunately. And it's like not their fault, but it's like exactly what you were saying. There's this sort of sense of interiority. They've written this thing. They didn't intend anybody to ever sort of like hear it. It just like somehow didn't even cross their mind. And then they go up and they have to read something from it. So they're like, oh God, okay, I'll read this one chapter or whatever. And then they, give a 10-minute spiel about who the people are and what they're doing, which is always just the worst thing ever to have to sit there and listen to. And then they read the chapter and, you're like, oh God. And so I knew I didn't want to do that in this novel. I knew I was going to be doing readings and I really wanted to be able to like be entertaining and actually be a performer. And so I legit wrote like chapters. I mean, not just, they obviously fit in with the story and are part of the narrative, but I did write chapters on purpose, like that could be performed, that I thought were funny, or had like, a lot of voice to them, had a lot of, rhythm and flow. But I think Yeah, yes, I was thinking about that here, but I think you're right. I think I'm always thinking about that a little bit. It's funny because when I first started doing readings, I had the worst time because and this was like way, way back, years ago, but I had the worst time because I had just come out of acting. And so I would like act. I wouldn't like read. I would just like act. And, I would do all the voices and everything. And, my friends who were writers were like, oh, like, okay, so maybe don't do the voices. You sound like a children's, a book author. And so I had to kind of learn how to like pull back a little bit and differentiate those two. But you're right. I am always thinking about audience in a way that, I mean, I guess I always thought that all writers thought about that, but I don't, I think you're right. I don't think everybody sort of does, which is good and bad. Yeah.
I think most writers at some point do, at least in an abstract way, but I think maybe just some writers have a more finely tuned sense of it.
Yeah.
And it's easier for them to sort of anticipate reactions or to sort of understand how their work is going to land.
Yeah.
And I always say when it comes to readings that you got to either make people laugh, make people cry, or read a sex scene. That's it.
Yep.
Anything else and you're going to fall flat on your face.
Yeah. I like reading funny. That's almost entirely what I choose to read. Either funny or like, occasionally, like when my last book came out, there wasn't actually that much that was funny in it. There's a few things, but it was an angry book. And so like angry works okay, especially if you're sort of reading it in this almost, like poem-y way. But I'd prefer to read funny always. And I've been doing that for this book because it's just, people are like, they already came to a book reading, they already did that. So it's like, why not just give them something to be entertained by?
I also read that you wanted to be, when you were a young person, I think in college, like initially, like you toyed with the idea of being a criminal psychologist before you became a theater major.
Yeah.
And so criminal psychologist is another piece of the puzzle that I find interesting because I can sort of see how this figures in to your work on the page. Like how far down that road did you go? And like, can you just talk about like why you wanted to be potentially a criminal psychologist?
Yeah, that was like when I was, going into college as a freshman, that was my goal. And that died like very early on. Like I took a stats class and then it died immediately. I was like, oh, never mind. I can't actually, no, thank you. And I also at the same time, a friend dragged me to an audition and I'd done a lot of theater in high school and I loved it, but I was like, oh, I'm not going to do that in college. And my friend dragged me to an audition and like, immediately I was like, on the phone to my parents being like, I need to change my major. So it was a very short-lived thing. I think it was primarily because I've always been very fascinated by, I hate to even say it as like a white lady in her 40s, but true crime. Oh, see, now everybody's like, oh, we know what you're like now. Like, and it's like, no, not like that. Not like the murdery, like podcasty people. Just like, but I have always, been fascinated by just detective novels and crime stories and mysteries and all that kind of stuff. And, of course, like everyone, I saw Silence of the Lambs and thought, ooh, I want to do that. The Clarice Starling part of it, not the Hannibal Lecter part of it, to be clear.
Thank you for clarifying. I appreciate it.
That would be weird. And so, yeah, I think, I was like 18 years old. I didn't know anything. I was an idiot. So I was like, yeah, I'll do that. And, that didn't pan out. Although, I made lots of interesting choices back then too, because my parents were like, well, if you go into theater, that's fine. But then you have to pick another major that will be like, that will actually earn you some sort of money and lead to a stable career. So I was like, okay. And then I picked philosophy. So it was,
you just doubled down.
It was a time of interesting choices.
Well, I don't think most young people at the age of 18 are in any way prepared to make those kinds of decisions. Occasionally somebody's going to have a real clear sight, in terms of what they're into. And they might have this great practical mind in terms of how it's going to pay off after they graduate. But I certainly wasn't anywhere near ready to understand any of that. And frankly, didn't really have great advice from the university I went to. Nobody was there holding my hand or like, not even holding my hand. Nobody was there to advise me at all. It was just like, hey, yeah, we'll cash your check. And, you know, it's kind of a mess.
That's right.
But I want to talk about the book itself and the way that it kind of bridges the divide between, it's like a mystery, it's a ghost story, it's a young person story, but yet there's like sex in it and death in it. Like it's a hybrid work. I would imagine you're aware of this. And I want to hear you talk about that because you can't really pin it down. I think some people might be like, this is YA. And I'm sure you're like, no, it's not. Or maybe you think that it is. Like, what do you see it as?
Yeah, definitely not YA. Although like I have nothing against YA. So it's I always think it's funny when people say that because I'm like, oh, is it? But like you point out, it has sex and it has a lot of things that would actually be very boring to like a person that reads YA, right? Lots of very introspective stuff. So it is kind of a weird hybrid. Actually, one of the things that I was wondering about when just before the book came out, I was like, I wonder where they're going to shelve this. I'm very curious because I'd seen it like, you know, called horror, which it's definitely not. And I was like, ooh, I hope nobody reads this expecting an actual horror book. And, you know, I'd seen mystery and thriller and, you know, literary fiction, obviously, which is kind of, I guess, how I think of it. But because that can kind of encompass all of the above. And there's two protagonists, right? And so one's a mother and one's a daughter. And, you know, so half the book is told from like a 10-year-old's perspective. So there is that element to it too. I think ultimately, I don't know if I would call it hybrid so much as I would just call it like a kitchen sink novel. Like I just have all these things that I'm interested in. And when I'm interested in something, I'm like, great, that's going to go in my book, which makes, you know, the editing process incredibly messy for me because there's tons of stuff that has to like come back out then or get cut down or, you know, get smushed together in different ways to make the book make sense. But I also couldn't write any other way because I just like wouldn't be interesting to me then. You know, I've always wanted to be one of those people that like sat down and was like, I'm going to write a story about, you know, a mother and a daughter and they take a trip together and, you know, like it's just this very normal story and there's a through line and, you know, nothing weird in there. But that my brain doesn't work that way. My brain is like, yeah, but somebody should work as a mermaid at a fish tank. And oh, by the way, I really love miniatures. So somebody should be doing something with dollhouses. And like, it's just the only way I can write, I think, which I think does make it kind of hard to categorize it sometimes. Like you know, people be like, what's the book about? And I'm like, I still don't really have like a great answer for that after, you know, all of this promotion time. But
let me take a stab at it.
Yeah, please. Take notes.
I mean, I think at its very heart, at its core, this is a mother-daughter story.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that's right.
I mean, I read that you lost your mother. That's hard. And then you're also a mother to a daughter, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, you kind of have to bring that stuff up. I don't think you write this book in the absence of those two circumstances.
No. It is very much a book about that. And that is absolutely the heart of it. All the other stuff is, you know, fun trim. But yeah, I think the mother-daughter story was always the story that I was most interested in too. Just sort of, you know, in telling and in thinking through. And that's obviously why the two protagonists as well. So yeah. And I had and you mentioned my mother, and that's exactly right. My mom died right before the pandemic, actually, which is when I started writing this book. And my own daughter was like 4, and so I was, you know, wrestling a lot with like going to therapy and wrestling a lot with the idea of like mothers and daughters and how to do things, you know, in some cases differently than my mom had done them, and you know, what that would mean and sort of what was all this grief that I was feeling. And just dealing with all these feelings, and obviously having a daughter at the same time sort of doubled that anxiety. And I remember I said to my therapist, kept telling me like, you should just write about this. And I was like, I think I am. I think that's what I'm doing actually right now. And she's like, well, I thought you were writing a book about a sanitarium and some people that like die in it and 20s ghosts. And I'm like, okay, but there's also a mother and a daughter in there. And she was like,
mothers,
okay.
daughters, ghosts. I think that all tracks. That all tracks, And so
I think that's right.
I think I read too that as a child, and maybe like, into your teenage years and college years and so on, you were weaned on, writers who really value play on the page and acts of like great imagination, like Italo Calvino and Borges and writers like this. You talk a little bit about your influences and how you sort of amalgamated those influences into the style that we see on the page in this book.
Yeah, absolutely. I could not write if writing wasn't play. Basically, I would be so bored. It has to be fun for me. And it's not always fun, all of the time, but it has to start out that way. And you're right. Like that is, I think, something that has been a huge influence for me, all those writers, the surrealists and all the sort of games that they played, the idea that coming up with writing, the Otherppl, right? Like kind of these constraints, the ideas of constraints. These are all the things that have kept me from ever having to like have like writer's block, I guess, because to me, it was always a matter of just like giving you the prompt, giving you the structure to play in, and then you could come up with something, whatever it was. And that's so much true for me that I actually can't even if I come up with like a great idea, I actually can't do anything with it or great characters or whatever until I actually have like the narrative structure in place. That's the only way I can get started. So a lot of times I'll actually sit on an idea for years because if I don't know what that narrative structure looks like, I can't begin to sort of get into that space because it's just not fun. It feels like chaos in here. So, and I do think it was interesting when I went to write the book because I've done a lot of short stories, right, that I think would be considered somewhat experimental, very playful, stories written in different forms, in like list form or menu form or, whatever it may be, with weird POVs. But I'd never, written this novel, like a full-length novel. And obviously in a novel, with a few exceptions, right? A few people have gotten away with this, but most people, you can't do like an experimental structure for the entire novel because people are going to get tired of it, right? Like there's a few people I can think of who have written novels essentially as lists or whatever, probably mostly Europeans. But I think as a whole, it just gets old as a conceit, right? And people don't want to keep reading that. So I knew I had to have like a traditional narrative structure in there because it was going to be a novel. But at the same time, I knew that I was not going to be able to write it if I didn't give myself some room to play in it. So I sort of basically gave myself chapters in which I could be more playful, do things that were a little weird, write a list. Or there's a chapter where like it's from the perspective of the ghosts, another perspective another chapter is told from like sort of a floating omniscient perspective of someone watching people eat at an Olive Garden. Like there's, a few things like that where somebody's writing a syllabus in one, right? Which is funny because my editor tried to get me to cut that. She's like, do people want to read about people writing a syllabus? And I'm like, well, I know my friends do. She's like, well, your friends are all writers. It's like, fair. But I had to keep those because otherwise I would have been so bored. I couldn't have like just written this straight narrative piece without that. And not only would I have been bored, but I think it wouldn't have been me. It wouldn't have had my voice. It would have just felt too different, like too much of a departure from what I was doing in the short story space. And I never wanted that. I didn't want it to be like, oh, Amber Sparks like reinvents herself as this traditional author. Like I wanted to still be writing weird shit. I just wanted to do it in a long form where I could do some more world building.
So when you say that you have to have a narrative structure in place before you can begin, Like, I don't think we're talking about an outline exactly, but I guess it's sort of like that. Like, what does it mean? And does this necessity apply as well to short stories, or is it only with this debut novel that you felt like you had to have the framework kind of ironed out before you could begin?
It's all works. It's not just the novel. It's short stories too. I always need to have this structure in place, and it's not an outline exactly. In fact, I never actually outline. I can't do that much planning, but it is more like if you could literally draw what the story would look like what the shapes of the story would be. That's I guess what I mean by the structure. So and sort of the way that it's told too. So, for example, I had this short story that just came out a few weeks ago. And I was really wrestling with it for a long time because I knew I wanted to tell this story about parties, like seeing your life flash by in parties, all the parties that you'd attended. I'd been talking to my husband about like parties and how, the quality of the type of parties that you go to changes so much as you get older and what you even think of when you think of the word party. So I knew I wanted to tell this story, but I could not figure out how to tell it in a way that would not just be like, so here's some parties that I went to. And eventually I don't even remember how, but I started thinking about a series of just like basically if someone was dying in a hospital bed and then they just got up before they died and walked through a door and they walked back to their past, what would they see? And so I kind of ended up telling the whole thing as a series of doors leading to different parties until the person is like born, essentially. So they're sort of going back through their life that way. And then it was like, once, not only is it like, oh, okay, then now I can tell this story, but it's like, oh, I can tell it well. Like it's like the ability to actually write well somehow comes back to me and once the structure is in place and I'm like, oh, okay, language, characters, all these things, I can do that now that I have this in place. So I did kind of the same thing for the novel. I mean, the novel's a little different because it's just so big. And so you can't sort of have like, here are these shapes and this is what the whole thing is going to look like. But I knew that I wanted to tell it in sort of these almost like fairy tale-esque titles and chapter titles that almost had this feeling of one of those novels where people are just like experiencing a series of events as opposed to sort of has this narrative, shape to it. So more of an episodic, I guess, feel in a way, even though it's not particularly an episodic novel. I knew that was the shape that I needed to be able to have these sort of separate chapters work, especially the ones that were more experimental.
Well, you have this mother and daughter, Alice and Fern, moving into this apartment building that used to be a sanitarium. That's kind of like the broad setup of this novel. And of course, this place is peopled by a variety of eccentric characters. There are dead bodies, ghosts. There's a love interest. There's romance. I mean, there's a lot of different things happening. It made me wonder, and especially like when I found out about you losing your mom, and then I kind of zeroed in on this is a mother-daughter story. It's also, I think, maybe a story written by somebody who's kind of wondering at this kind of thing, like the afterlife, if there is one, ghosts, is that real? Made me wonder if you've ever seen a ghost or like how you feel about these kinds of things. Like, do you have strong thoughts?
I hope that there are ghosts. That's where I stand. I think I've never seen one. I've never had a paranormal experience. I wish that I had. I want to believe, like the old, X-Files tagline. And I think maybe that's part of my longtime fascination. I want there to be ghosts because I want there to be something. Like most writers, I'm terrified of death and also fascinated by it and have been thinking about it since I was probably 3 years old. And to me, ghosts are it's less of a, ghost in a white sheet or, ectoplasm or, whatever ghosts typically represent, and more of, I don't want to say a metaphor, but basically a sense not only that life continues in some way, but that we continue in some way, that our personalities continue in some way. As much as I think it would be I'm sure I would actually be terrified and like shit my pants if I saw like a scary ghost. But, at the same time, I also, I think it would be like entertaining in some way, shape or form, I guess. But I also, don't need ghosts to be scary. I'd rather actually have a ghost that was banal, if that makes sense. Because to me, that is sort of it sort of means that we get to keep our personalities and keep our lives and sort of move forward quietly into this gray room where, maybe we can't do all the things we used to be able to do, but all the things that sort of made us up are still there in some way, including like all of our neuroses, which weirdly I would actually like to keep. So yeah, I think for me, I've written about ghosts over and over again in different ways. They are a little bit of an obsession, and I never quite write about them in the same way twice. And I think part of that is just literally me experimenting with what could the afterlife be like if there was an afterlife, which I don't really believe in, but if there was one, like what would I want that to look like, or what could that look like?
Yeah. I don't know where I stand with it. I think I just don't know. I think it could be lights out, in which case you won't know. And so it's just over, and that'll be nice in a way. Or I also could be persuaded quite easily that like whatever we're seeing with our human eyes on this plane of reality is but like a tiny fraction of the entire picture. And there could be spirit realms. There could be spirits in the room with me right now that I can't see. There could be some sort of continuation or reincarnation or next realm that you go to. I mean, I'm wide open. I just don't know.
Yeah, I don't either. I think that's the exciting thing, I guess, which is honestly one of the biggest reasons that I don't want it to be lights out. And, it probably is, and that's fine. But then I also don't get the like, oh yeah, okay, so this is the one. This is what it is. You don't get that like sort of I'm right or I'm wrong, or this is, okay, this is what it is. You just don't know, to your point. But I think ghosts, they're also just people, right? And at least in the kind of stories that I tend to write. And it in a sense, it almost gives like me another chance to just have another character in there that isn't maybe beholden to the same laws of physics as the other characters. So they can kind of pop in and pop out and, maybe be useful in other ways. So there's probably like also just a mechanic reason for having ghosts in a story sometimes too. Sort of a deus ex machina, but, just ghosts.
Yeah, it opens things up. I mean, you can break all the rules with a ghost, or you can break a lot of them. And, I hear stories, or I'll read stories about people who have had some kind of paranormal experience or some sort of near-death experience even, where they kind of get a glimpse, or, these stories about people seeing the light, or whatever, getting their whole life played before their eyes, and then they come back to, they're resuscitated. And then I also recall, like, just totally randomly, I recall this interview with Larry King. Remember him, the CNN
yes.
interlocutor? I want to say that guy had like 5 heart attacks in his life before COVID finally got him. Like, he was a chain smoker for a long time, and, wasn't the healthiest guy for a long time.
Yeah.
But survived a long time. And he was, I think, technically dead at least once on like on the gurney, and then they shocked him back to life or something. And he's like, I saw nothing. There's nothing, like that just haunts me, So it's like, you sort of hear it. You hear it said both ways. I don't know.
The white light and all that. Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. I read a book, and I cannot remember who wrote it. I think maybe Connie Willis, I think it was called Passages or something like that. She's a fiction writer, like sci-fi fiction. And she wrote this book, which was really interesting. And the whole thing, basically at the beginning, like somebody dies. And the whole rest of the book is they're sort of in their own brain, basically. And they've already died, right? They've like flatlined. But in their head, their brain is still working, and it's still like they're still alive or in this other plane of consciousness or whatever. And they're actually like sinking on the Titanic, I think. It's some ship that's sinking. And so they're like, you know, going around and having these conversations with other people, and slowly the people are disappearing and it's just them. And at the end, it's just them on the Titanic by themselves. But the Titanic never actually sinks. It just is sailing and they're just sitting there like forever. And I had this, that actually to me is like, really terrifying. Like, what if death never ends? What if you're just stuck in this other plane of existence forever? Just you. And so I've always sort of thought about writing about that too. But then I'm like, wait, Connie Willis already did, and she did the best job. So, but I've heard like theories that actually could be what happens to the human brain after death. That there is like sort of this activity that even if it only lasts a few minutes, it feels like it lasts years or decades or a lifetime. So just weird to think about. It's totally.
I mean, I think like maybe part of me believes that whatever happens and whatever is going on here, period, is just a lot weirder than we can even begin to fathom. And I mean like weird with a capital W. Like, like we could be an alien experiment. This could be a simulation. There could be realms and, you know, different gears like turning in the universe that we just have no conception of at all.
Yeah.
Like that kind of, I mean, like human beings are pretty dumb in the scheme of things, I think. Like this idea that we sort of know what's going on, you know, in some kind of supernatural or religious / godly sense, kind of doesn't pass the smell test. It seems a little ridiculous to me to think that we could somehow figure this out. Like we just started like farming like 10,000 years ago, or you know what I'm saying? Like I don't know how
exactly.
Like weren't we like we were like apes like a couple 100,000 years ago? Like this is we're still new and we're still very primitive, I think, in most of our understandings. So
yeah, and don't we only use like a tiny fraction of our brains? Like basically, they're just like we don't know what the rest of that stuff is, or what it's for, or what you do with it. So yeah, I feel like there's so much more to human existence. And I think I've never experienced anything outside of the realm of the natural, but I think, you know, so much of what I write comes back to that over and over again, like wanting to have that experience, you know. It's like my daughter, to come back to my daughter. So my daughter's 10 now, which is funny because she's the same age as Fern in the book. And she's very much like Fern in a lot of ways, which is also strange. But she, you know, is kind of at that age now where she's like, she really wants to still believe in magic. And she kind of does, but then she's also like, oh, I don't know, like some of this stuff doesn't really make sense. Or like her friends are like, no, that's not true. And she's a kid who's, you know, that's her whole life is built around the idea of magic and fantasy and fairy tales and all these things. A lot like Fern, actually. And it's so funny, just like when you talk to her about this, because she'll ask me, she'll be like, well, do you still believe in magic? And I'm like, I do, because I do. But also at the same time, she's like, well, have you ever had like have you stepped through a portal to another world, or have you had a magical adventure? And I'm like, no, I'm still waiting. Like, I'm still waiting for that. So I feel like I'm going to be on my deathbed being like, okay, like, let's go. We got to speed this up.
Yeah. Open the portal.
Exactly.
Well, I want to talk about some other influences, that I think affect probably all of your books, but in particular this one, which have to do, I think, with maybe like cinematic. We talked about your theatrical background, but I could feel to like a distinct degree, like a degree that exceeds most of the writers that I read, the influence of film. And maybe some of these archetypal characters even. Like for some reason, I'm thinking of my friend Ben Laurie's work. I don't know if you're familiar with him and his work.
I love Ben, yeah.
Yeah. Like you guys do different things, but his work is imbued with a kind of similar thing where he does like interesting variations on archetypes and even like scenes that have played in many different movies, like different variations, but it's the same essential dynamic where like I'll give an example. Like Wes Anderson does this too. I think Wes Anderson's probably an influence on you as well, where I think there's that scene in the Royal Tenenbaums. There's that scene where Royal Tenenbaum is pretending to have had a heart attack.
Yeah.
And the doctor, like they're like all standing around him, and they're worried about him. And one of the kids asked like the doctor, like, is he going to make it? And he's like, I don't know. Is he a fighter? Like, do you know what I'm saying? And like we all laugh. We all laugh at that scene, not because there was really like a punchline or anything. It's just because we know the art, the riff. We know that this scene has played out in a million different movies. And so I kind of felt that sort of thing happening in your book. And I would just love to hear about maybe the influence of cinema and some of the movies in particular that you might have had on your mind as you were working on this novel. And then maybe some of the other things that I think appear in this book, like you seem to be fascinated with artists. You seem to be fascinated with con artists. But this stuff maybe feels of a piece with like cinema, like these kinds of character archetypes.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that question because I always wanted to, make films. That was actually, I never wanted to act in films, but I wanted to direct films. I actually initially wanted to go to film school, and it was like way, way too expensive. So I was like, my parents were like, you're going to state school. They were like, okay, isn't film school at state school too? I was like, not in Wisconsin. But so I've always been really obsessed with film. I love movies. It's actually, I might even love movies more than I love books. It's definitely very, very equal for me. And I actually do a lot of film writing as well. I used to do more, but I still do some every now and then. And so I'm always thinking about films and movies, and it's definitely something that I think pervades all of my books, right? To a pretty large degree. And in fact, it's so funny because the opening scene of the book, or I guess it's not the opening scene, it's like the first chapter where you meet Fern and she's like walking through the apartment complex, and you kind of meet all the different characters as she's going, was a scene that no one would ever know this or pick up on this, but was very much influenced by the beginning of Boogie Nights. Because I joke that I'm always trying to write the beginning of Boogie Nights, because it's just like the most genius, fantastic opening where you get all your business done, you introduce all the characters, you set the tone and the mood, and like draw the audience in, and it's just like, it's perfect, right? It's just one long shot. And so I definitely was kind of doing that, or trying to do that in that scene with Fern a little bit. And I'm always thinking about like, oh, this particular scene, there's a, and it's sort of both referenced in the books and then also sort of a larger influence on the scenes themselves. So, Fern and her mother are, they watch films, right, together. That's one of the things that they do. And, I had just done a rewatch of Orpheus, of Cocteau's Orpheus, when I was writing the book. And so that popped in there because I kept thinking about the scene where Orpheus like goes to the underworld and, is sort of floating around in there. And of course, I'm writing my own underworld book in a way. So that pervaded my thinking a lot. But I think I'm always thinking very cinematically. And sometimes I'm like so mad that I'm not a filmmaker, not because I want to be doing that with my life, but right now, but because I'm like, oh, I could write this story perfectly if it were a film. Like I can see how it looks in my head, and I can see if only I could somehow magically translate that onto the page, which of course that's not writing at all, right? That's not what writing does. They're very different. And I actually think that's something, even that's a trap that a lot of young writers fall into now, where they actually are trying to write like they're writing a movie or a film, like from the get-go. You see that a lot, I think, with a lot of books where it's like, oh, somebody wrote this thinking it was going to get made into a film, very specifically. I don't agree that the two are the same. I think literature is very, very different and should be very different than a movie. But I do think that sort of cinematic sense, and as you mentioned, just sort of these these references, right? Like these almost like, I don't want to say like memes, but these sort of themes, I guess, that play out in film. And everybody sort of knows them, knows these jokes, knows these lines. They do tend to come up a lot in my fiction. And I have a lot of fun playing with that, especially for the folks who like who get it and know it. It's like a fun Easter egg, I feel like.
So another obsession of yours I read is 1920s and the beginning of modernism. Like that's a period that is of fascination to you. I think that's a period that fascinates me too. I'd be curious to know why.
Yeah, I think because it is the beginning of modernism and there's just this there's this, melding of the old and the new and really that even starts with, I think, like World War I. For me, like the sort of the last half of World War I, where all of a sudden the weapons change and you have tanks and you have modern warfare, but people still have this old like gallant sense of how they're fighting, and it's this clash of the way that the world it was and is in many ways, and then the 1920s, of course, sort of like accelerates that, and that's the beginning, the true beginning, and. Yeah, I've always found that just really, really fascinating. Part of it is just 1920s culture. I think is fun. And maybe it's just that I grew up reading a lot of like Fitzgerald and Hemingway and all these writers who were writing about that time period or in that time period as well. But there's something about, I don't know, what is it that interests you? I'm curious. I don't know if I can put my finger on it for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a macabre fascination with World War I because it was so brutal. I think if there's a war to avoid, it was World War I.
Yeah.
Trench warfare, it was the first time mechanized warfare had ever happened on planet Earth. And so there was something, I think, particularly brutal about it because it was kind of bridging this divide in time, where there was, like you said, this gallantry. Like, think back to the Civil War, when you kind of gave each other time to load your muskets, and and then suddenly it's just we've got a giant machine gun and we're just going to mow you down, and it's just, that's a big difference. So that is a grim thing to think about, but it's hard not to once you kind of engaged with it. And then like I think so much generationally of the reading that I did in high school and college and English classes was coming from that era, either directly or, down the line was influenced by it. And maybe even later works would reference it. It was a very influential time, for American literature. And then I think as I got into my professional life, there's something so alluring about being able to live in a place like Paris on the cheap in a post-war economy.
Yeah.
And to live in a world where books and the written word were so central and you could make a real living doing it, just writing short stories. And, that for somebody who likes books, it's oh, this sounds fabulous,
Yeah.
But it was also, there was no air conditioning or antibiotics or, everybody probably smelled, who knows, but it's got its
tuberculosis. They had tuberculosis.
Yeah.
In sanitariums. So.
But no, it's an easy time to be fascinated with. And, I think the visual arts also are a fascination too. You're just an enthusiast, it seems like to me. You love this stuff.
I love everything. No, I am. I'm probably really annoying as a person because I get into something and then I'm just into it. I'm like, oh, this is one of my new things. And I have so many at this point. But yeah, I do. I love the visual arts. I've always loved artists, writing about artists. I think partially because I am not an artist. I have no ability to do any kind of visual art. I'm just not talented in that way. And it's funny, my daughter is. She's actually an amazing artist. And I don't just say that because I'm her mother. She really is. And has this really incredible sort of aesthetic that she's developed already at 10. And it's all the more amazing to me because I don't have that at all. And so, but I appreciate art. I love art. I, collect it as much as I can, not being a rich person. And I go to museums all the time and, brought my daughter up, taking her to museums. So, it's a really, really important part of my life. And I think maybe that's why I like writing about artists, because I don't do that. I actually hate writing about writers, for example. I'm always fascinated when someone writes a book, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's some really great books many great books where the protagonist is a writer. But I'm always fascinated by how people do that, because I couldn't stand to write an entire book about a writer. It would just because that's what I do. So it would drive me nuts. I'd be so bored by myself. But on the other hand, artists, that's something like, ooh, I'd always wish that I could do that. So I do love writing about people who practice art and visual art specifically.
So what about making the transition from being a kind of celebrated writer of short stories to writing this debut novel? Like, that's always interesting to me, like how writers make that leap. I think in a lot of ways, writing short fiction is great preparation. I mean, we see this progression all the time where somebody starts out publishing collections or just publishing short stories like a la carte in literary journals or whatever. And then eventually they take the step into writing a novel. But can you just talk about how it went for you? Like maybe some of the challenges that you faced or some of the things that you learned?
Yeah. Honestly, a huge piece of it for me was just I'm really stubborn, and I was gonna write a novel. I wasn't gonna rest until I did. I've tried to write like 3 of them. One of them actually became an anchor novella in my short story collection, The Unfinished World. And initially that was like a 350-page novel, and it turned into a like 75-page story. And another novel I tried to write, actually funny to what we were just talking about. The first novel I ever tried to write was, I should have known better. It was a version of Odysseus set in World War I, which was very ambitious for like a 22, 23-year-old writer. And so that did not pan out. But interestingly enough, though, there's actually like I think there's a scene or 2 scenes maybe that came from that book that actually are in this book, because I'm a huge cannibal of my own work. I keep everything and I cannibalize good stuff. If it's good writing, I'll take it and I'll use it again. But yeah, like, so this was sort of the third time's the charm, and I was really determined to make it happen. Not just pure stubbornness, but also because I really wanted to have the chance to engage with a world and the chance to build it out in a different way than I had with short stories. So I just stuck it out, but it was hard. I mean, I keep telling people, like, I hated it so much. I hated it. I hated writing the novel. I don't ever want to write another one, but I will, because now I have the sickness. It's in me. But it was really hard as a short story author, and I actually had to write another short story collection like around it while I was writing the novel, because else I would have just died of boredom. So I had to keep myself engaged by writing short stories in between.
So you're busy.
I am very busy.
How do you do it? Like, I'm curious, like, just like you have a kid, you're busy, you're doing stuff, like, but do you have a very like disciplined approach, or are you just somebody who like works really fast when she does work? Or
yeah, I think it's more of that. I don't have a disciplined approach. I have ADD. I'm like all over the place. I have no time to write. So, I basically write on the weekends because I have a full-time job, and it's a pretty demanding job. So, I don't really write during the week, but I am somebody, maybe because of the ADD, who has always been able to like work really fast when I need to, and to get a lot done in a very short space of time. So, I'm like the opposite. Like there's, and whatever works for you works for you. I have no beef with anyone's practice, but, people would always say, oh, you have to write every day. And, just write a little bit every day. And then at the end of that time, you'll have a book. And that just never worked for me. I can't write every day. Even if I had time, I couldn't sit down and write every day. I have to like basically be at the point where I'm like, oh crap, I need to actually write more of this book because it's due, or because, if I don't get this done, like that means this book's not going to be out for another year, or, whatever. Like there actually has to be that. And then I will sit down and I will just like zone and write for hours and hours and hours and get things done when I need to. So I'm very sporadic in my approach, but I am I mean, I shouldn't say I'm a fast writer because it took me 5 years to write the novel. So that's not very fast actually. But, a lot of that time was spent not writing too.
So I always close by asking my guests if they're working on anything new. It's fine if you're not. I got to believe you probably are, considering what you just said, that you've got something going, even if it's just a short story. But and you also mentioned that you have the sickness. Congratulations, I guess, on suddenly finding yourself a novelist. But do you have another novel in the works? Like what's in the pipeline?
Yeah, I've got a couple things. I'm always working on a couple things. I'm working on a short story collection that I'm just finishing up that hopefully will be out in the next year or so. And I'm very excited about it, actually. It's sort of all stories that are sort of oriented around family, parents and kids, stuff like that. So working on that. I'm working on working on a memoir about my mom, although that may just be something I work on forever. It's a long-term project, I think. And then I'm working on another novel, which is, I don't know what I'm doing. I am so mad at myself already.
But wait, 3 different books?
Oh, I'm always working on like 3 different things. Yeah, I can never just work on one thing. That's like not how my brain works at all.
So that's the ADD.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's also, like, I don't know. I don't mean to make light, but I feel like it's kind of a superpower too. You're getting a lot done.
Oh, my daughter has ADD and I tell her it's a superpower because it absolutely is. I mean, people are super annoyed with you all the time, but also you have the ability to like just do things that other people can't always do. So including like hyper focus, right? You could actually sit there if you need to and like work for 10 hours and not look up and suddenly be like, oh, where am I? But yeah, I do have to always work on lots of different things, which is the only way I would get anything done. Otherwise, I would just be sitting around playing video games otherwise all day long. You
play video games?
I do. Yeah, I love video games.
Like what ones?
What ones? Oh no, that's a terrible question. What I'm playing, I have a bunch of like horror ones that I just got, including a new one that just came out for Switch called Bye Sweet Charlotte, I think, which I'm really excited about because I love horror games, but I love everything. I'm not like a gamer, I should say. Like I don't play like Call of Duty or like any of those kind of. And I don't have a PlayStation. Had one a long time ago, but we all have a Switch in my family, so we play the Nintendo family of games mostly.
Yeah, I don't even know what a Switch is. That's how old out of it I am.
It's like the newer handheld from Nintendo. So, like Mario Kart, and they have a new Mario Kart game, which is actually fantastic. And I like puzzle games and, things like that, detective games. So I do.
And you said earlier that you write for film and television too. Like, is this like write for hire, or are you just like speccing scripts?
Oh, no. I write about film and television, like just for like essays and things like that for like magazines that write about it. So I've been writing it lately for a magazine that I love called Bright Wall Dark Room, and they're so great because they let you go long on kind of whatever you want. And it doesn't have to be a current film, and it's actually usually better if it's not. And you can sort of talk about things like thematically, and sort of delve into these like specific issues on film. So it's not just kind of like a film review, which we have plenty of sites like this. But no, I like doing more. I should say I used to write for IndieWire too, but I love doing more like thinking about older films particularly. Although I love all film.
Do you have a favorite era in film?
Oh, I have a couple. I mean, I love the 1970s. I love that sort of just when everything was just ugly, and like Donald Sutherland was a could be a leading man and like a love interest, and everyone was just kind of sweaty and everything was brown. I love those films. Gene Hackman's films from the 70s, right? I also love spaghetti westerns a lot, but I also love like films from the 20s and 30s, right? I love the Marx Brothers and a lot of like silent film comedies and Universal horror films from the 1930s and 40s. We're introducing our daughter to a bunch of those right now, which is really fun. And, I love horror movies in general, particularly from that time period. So the golden age of horror. But yeah, I love everything.
Well, it's a delight to talk with you, and congratulations on this debut novel of yours. Perfectly timed for release right before Halloween, I must say. I think that's strategic. Good job by the marketing team. And I wish you well with all of the different projects you have going, and I thank you for taking the time to talk.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. This was awesome.
All right, everybody, there we go. That was my conversation with Amber Sparks, talking about her debut novel, Happy People Don't Live Here. It is available now from Liveright Press, a perfect Halloween book. You can find out more at Amber's website, ambernoelsparks.com. And I believe she's on Blue Sky and Instagram. She might be elsewhere, but I know she's on those too. So one more time, the book is called Happy People Don't Live Here, the debut novel by Amber Sparks, available now wherever books are sold. Go get your copy. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen. Hit the subscribe button, and you can follow me on Instagram and Blue Sky. Sign up for my newsletter over at bradlisti.substack.com. And if you love this show, you can support it over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. If you want to join my book club or get an Other People t-shirt or a sweatshirt, you can do all of the above at the show's official website, www.otherppl.com. Don't forget to check out DeepDive and its flagship course, How to Write a Novel, more than 50 hours of never-before-heard insight, inspiration, and instruction from nearly 4 celebrated contemporary authors. You can check it out. You can check out How to Write Autobiographical Fiction with Hannah Pittard at www.deepdive.audio. And then finally, if you have a moment to spare and you want to help me out a little bit, I would be deeply appreciative if you would give this show a rating wherever you listen. So if you're listening on Spotify, you can rate it there. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, you can rate it there. Write a little review. All of it helps the algorithmic situation. It helps people find the show, and it helps the show attract new listeners. So rate it and review it. You would have my gratitude. All right, so we're getting close to the 1,000th author interview in the Otherppl catalog. That is really mind-blowing to me. Somehow it has happened all of these years, and almost 1,000. So I guess wait and see what's going to happen for the 1,000th episode. Otherwise, I'll be back on Thursday, or I should be back on Thursday, with Mira Gonzalez for a brand new episode of Brad and Mira for The Culture, the Otherppl podcast's weekly pop culture assessment. It's an irreverent show. It's a hangout show. Mira is a millennial. I am old. I'm a Gen Xer. It's a show about bridging the generational divide. It is also about me learning what's happening in pop culture. Mira knows a lot. I know a little. And that's sort of the game. So Brad and Mira for The Culture, a new episode coming up on Thursday.